Welcome to the Misophonia podcast. This is season 8, episode 2. My name is Adil Ahmad, and I have Misophonia. This week I'm talking to Rosie, who's based in Newcastle, England, and heard about the podcast from Newcastle-based Misophonia researcher Paris Ash, who is also a guest on the podcast. She first noticed it as a teenager with the sound of her mom's chewing, and that later expanded to include other people and sounds. She struggled with guilt and shame and felt misunderstood by her family. Rosie found support from her understanding sister and her partner, who create spaces where she feels safe. We talk about coping methods, using headphones, avoiding triggers, and seeking understanding from people around her. She reflects on the connection between misophonia and dysregulation of emotions, as well as the impact of her upbringing on her condition. And we also talk about the importance of self-care and self-compassion in managing misophonia. After the show, let me know what you think. You can reach out by email at hello@misophoniapodcast.com or hit me up on Instagram or Facebook at Misophonia Podcast. By the way, please head over and leave a quick rating or review wherever you listen to the show. It really helps drive us up in the algorithms, which really helps other people find the podcast if they're looking for misophonia. A few of my other usual announcements. Thanks for the incredible ongoing support of our Patreon supporters. If you feel like contributing, you can read all about the various levels at patreon.com/misophoniapodcast. This episode is also sponsored by the personal journaling app that I developed called Basal, B-A-S-A-L. Basal provides AI-powered insights into your journal entries and guides you with new writing prompts based on those insights. You can even explore many different therapy approaches and modalities. It's available on iOS and Android. Check the show notes or go to hellobasal.com. All right, now here's my conversation with Rosie. Rosie, welcome to the podcast. Great to have you here.
Hello, it's great to be here.
So do you want to tell us roughly where you are and a little bit about what you do there?
Yeah, so I am in the northeast of England. That is what you meant, isn't it?
Yes, yeah.
Literally where I am,
Yeah.
not where I'm at in my Misophonia journey. I am in the northeast of England, in Newcastle, which is right up near Scotland, and I currently work as a cook, part-time, and I also work in marketing part-time. So I kind of do lots of bits and bobs.
Mhm.
I work out a lot in the community, the local community, mainly around hospitality, small businesses, things like that. And recently, I had a baby last year, which prompted me to actually think more about my where I'm at with misophonia.
Mhm.
So yeah, I'm kind of settling into a family life with a small, with a toddler now. Yeah.
Yeah, and when you first reached out, you said you've had misophonia since you were a teen. I mean, obviously, it sounds like there's a lot of stuff going on now, but yeah, maybe we can kind of
Yeah.
go back to kind of like early days for you and when you
Yeah, of
started to notice
course.
it.
Yeah, so I noticed it when I remember this. It was a very specific moment. I was on holiday with my mother and my sister. We used to go on holiday, the three of us, quite a lot. My mother and father were split up, and I used to spend most of my time at my mother's house. And we used to travel mainly to places like Greece and Turkey, which are very hot countries. And
Mm-hmm.
I used to find generally that I was in a bad mood because of that to
Mm-hmm.
begin with. And I remember going on this trip, like high up into the Greek mountains somewhere on a really hot bus, and I was in a really bad mood. And we were sitting outside eating some lunch, and I just noticed that the way that my mum was eating was making me so angry that I wanted to hurt her, and then I couldn't understand why I felt that way, and I felt so trapped because I was so hot. That's what I remember the most. I was so hot, so I felt like suffocated because there was this noise
Mm-hmm.
next to me, and then there was the heat. It was like sensory overload, and I remember looking down and crying because I really just was in so much distress and so much pain. And I think I remember my mum kind of saying, oh, what's wrong with you? But because I had a bit of a reputation for being quite a moody teenager anyway, it just, it was kind of
Yeah,
just seen as
rolled
like,
into
oh,
that, right?
that's Rosie, she's just been moody. And then I think it was for the rest of the holiday, I noticed it was just whenever my mum was eating, it was a really specific thing. It was the way she was chewing, and it was the pace of how she was chewing. Um, and then that was when I first realised it. But then from there, the focus was very much around my mother for, I would say, throughout my teenage years. It
Mm-hmm.
didn't it didn't go into other people until a bit later, but it was a real focus around my mother. And when I got back from that holiday, I found that I couldn't sit with her. I couldn't even sit in the passenger seat in the car, so I started sitting in the back, which created quite a bit distance between me and my mum because she felt like I hated her.
Mm-hmm.
And I just couldn't, just could not bring myself, because I didn't understand it. You don't understand it then. You don't understand it when you're a teenager. It takes years to understand what's actually happening. And I just thought, all I know is I have to be away from certain noise and the sight of certain movement as well, which I
Yeah.
think was Misophonia, maybe.
Yeah.
Um,
Right. Right.
I'm not,
Mysokinesia. Yeah.
oh, is that
Visual
how it's
triggers. Yeah.
pronounced? Yeah. So there was like the two things sort of going on for me. So I just had to be out of her sight as much as possible. Or she had to be out of my sight as much as possible. So I actually became very reclusive as a teenager. As a
Mm-hmm.
result, I stayed in my room a lot. I had loads of things that I really loved to do anyway in my room, like my PlayStation and CDs and stuff like that. And
Yeah.
I just needed to just be in this bubble, and I just didn't. I became more inward because of, I was kind of scared to go downstairs and hear noises. It was a very small house as well.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, that was the beginning of it.
And then
Um,
you got into hospitality at some point. So obviously,
I
quite a
know. So
journey.
this is a really strange one actually, because I didn't get actually that triggered by work. I worked in restaurants since I was 15.
Yeah.
Um, and weirdly, it's just not, that was never a huge trigger for me. I think because I was far away enough from a lot of people. I don't know. And it's quite fleeting when you waitress and you kind of back and forth. And
Mm-hmm.
so waitressing wasn't, hospitality wasn't too much of a big deal. It was just um, more sort of being around too many people, I guess, in one go. That that would kind of, I guess, working in hospitality exhausted me to a point that it made having misophonia harder. But
Mm.
no, my triggers are very specific and come from other places. It's
Like
strange.
specific people, like your mom, obviously.
Yeah, so it's like the biggest. Yeah, I would say it was only my mum for about 2 3 years. It was
Mm-hmm.
just her, and it was kind of like the she actually is a really polite eater. This is another thing that confused me. She's she's so polite that it's actually so annoying because she kind of chews so slowly, and it makes her jaw do this click, and it
Yes.
kind of goes click 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 click, and it makes like, it's as though this fire like starts inside of me, and I'm like, oh my god, I just have to get away from this. It's just so horrible. And then I noticed it kind of was to do with afterwards, if she was clearing things in her mouth, and it was just the whole,
Yeah. Yeah. I know
yeah,
that. Yeah.
just the whole thing. Um, and then my mum started to notice how much it bothered me, and then it turned into, oh, that's what your dad is like, and so it runs in it.
Oh.
Yeah, it runs in my family, which is something I haven't actually found out yet about other people with the condition, but my dad has it and my grandma, so his mother, and
Mm.
but they would never admit that they have it. I've tried to bring it up loads, but I was told when I was little that people just have bad manners. It's just other people and bad manners. And I remember thinking, even when I was a teenager, it can't just be that, because this is like, I feel like I'm gonna like pass out from how overwhelmed and angry I feel from this. Like, surely that is not normal. But my mum and dad used to sit in separate rooms because my dad couldn't stand to be around her eating.
Oh,
And
really?
yeah,
Okay.
so it was a really big. I was brought up with, like, you know, in my father, so I was kind of used to it, but it was kind of just seen as like a trait of like, oh, that's typically him. So my mom did not take it in any way seriously, mainly because it's hard to understand for someone who doesn't have it,
Mm-hmm.
and B, because she did not like my dad at the time. So
Right.
it was like she was kind of putting that onto me. So there was a bit of transference there. It was kind of like, oh, you're like him.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
You said your mom's a polite eater, and it's interesting that your dad would go as far as having you be in a different room. Obviously, maybe he's picking up on the same sounds that you later
yeah.
picked
Well,
up on.
we have discussed it. It's only after we've had a few drinks I've managed to get it out of him, and he. I mentioned the click and jaw once, and he was like, "The click and jaw, it's that fucking click and jaw. What is that click and jaw?" And I was like,
Yeah.
I know, it's just so annoying." Um, so I don't know. There's something. Yeah, she's not allowed to eat it. She's just. I think it's the pace of how she eats. I think that's what
Yeah.
holds it for me.
Right. It's not always about the sound per se.
Yeah,
As you can tell by the visual thing, it's there's other factors involved psychologically, and
yeah.
so
It's like a whole process of yeah. My my mum kind of eats every single thing off the plate as well, so she'll kind of use the
hmm
spoon to scrape every single
do it lovely.
like for
Yeah.
absolutely ages, and I'm just it feels like I'm being tortured.
Yeah. So you were told at an early age, even after your, well, yeah, at an early age to even after um, you knew what it was, that it was your dad. Basically, your dad told you it was bad manners, and your grandma, right?
Yeah,
It
so
was like,
for many years I was taught,
yeah,
because I think I'd mentioned to my dad, like it's obvious we both have this thing, and he just would always put it down. And no, it's just other people have really, really bad manners, and we're just trying
ah,
to manage that. So for a long time, I was just thinking, okay, there's nothing like wrong with me. It's just that it's just the
yeah.
world and their bad manners. Um,
What about you said you had a sister or a sibling, right? Or
yeah, I've got a sister. I've now got three sisters, but growing up, I had one
mhm.
who I lived with. She is the best person in my life in regards to having
Mm,
misophonia. She's very understanding, always has been, very accommodating, and she does trigger me sometimes, but I find she triggers me less because she understands.
yeah,
So
yeah.
again, I'm not sure if that's a sort of a regular thing.
Hey, well,
But
if this is about if this is about like your brain kind of miswarning you about some danger, then
mhm.
if it's ascribing less of a danger to your sister, that makes sense that you would be less triggered by her.
Yeah, it was because I would feel triggered by something, but I wouldn't go into a panic because
Yeah,
I knew that I could ask her to stop and she would stop. But as my teenage years went on and I became known to be this person who didn't, like certain sounds, and then got labelled noise police, and that was always my name, which is
I'll
quite
take that
funny.
name. Yeah,
Yeah, noise police. And I noticed like this. So at first it was the eating, and then the thing that really developed quite heavily when I was about 15 or 16, and it's stuck with me. It's still one of my biggest triggers. Is just being able to hear a television from another room.
hmm
It's just unbearable for me. Like I can't sit. Like I would rather sit outside in an avalanche. I
right.
just would. I hate it. Like it's if I can hear another neighbour's television, if I can hear the bass line to anything,
Yeah,
and I lived in quite a small house, and my mum had a boyfriend that she used to watch television with, and they would, it would be something quite garish, like a game show, quite loud, and my room was directly above, and I used to be in tears in my room because I'd be like, I really hate it, and I couldn't understand why, because I'm like, it's just a
yeah,
television, and it's not actually about the volume, it's like that,
right.
like
Yeah,
muffled.
yeah.
It made again, it's like that closing in feeling. I felt like I was being drowned almost. Like I
hmm
can't escape this noise. It's like out of my control. And I
hmm
remember going to ask about. I went downstairs and said, "Do you mind turning it down?" And they turned it down a little bit, and then I went upstairs and they turned it back up, and then I went back down. Please, can you turn it down? Oh, you're just the noise police. Like you're just like your dad. And
Oh
so
no.
then I started to become obsessed with having like my music, and then they wouldn't understand because they'd be like, "Well, why have you put more noise on if it's quiet that you want?" And I was
Right.
like, I can't describe this. It's just I can't have that noise. I just can't have that constant like boop 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 boop. It just drives me
hmm
crazy. Um,
Yeah.
so that was that became um that was like my biggest trigger next to the eating. And then from there, I started to just dread going anywhere, like going on holiday. Or my mum loves going away, and she loves going on mini trips, going on buses and coaches around the country, anywhere. And going on a coach to me is like my idea of hell, because you're in a small space
Yeah.
with about, I don't know, 40 people. You have no idea what they're going to do. So
Right.
I used to back out of lots of things, to which my mum would, it was just like, oh, well, that's Rosie. She's just grumpy and doesn't like to be involved in anything. But what was so sad is I really did. And I loved going to see things. And I've always had a thirst for knowledge and, wanted
Hmm.
to travel. But that I could not cope with thinking about getting onto a coach for 8 hours to go to London or something to see something. And it would, she actually still makes me feel guilty about these things. She'll be like, I used to try and take you everywhere when you're little. Because she made it so clear to me from a young age that it's, it's not that it's wrong, it's just not acknowledged. It's just
Yeah.
simply not a thing. It's just a Rosie quirk. It's not,
Hmm.
and even though I've explained it over and over now, which I'll get to, it's still just completely ignored.
Really? So
So
that whole guilt and shame that we all get, and
mhm.
at some point, you're still getting that even after like explaining it to her and probably showing
Yeah,
links. Of,
yeah, I've tried a few times, and um, I in 2021 I had some therapy related to
hmm
other things that had gone on in my life, and just trying to. I think like most people in the COVID-19 lockdown, everyone kind of reevaluated their life and their
Yeah.
existence, and I realised that there was actually quite a lot of things affecting like how
hmm
my happiness in life, and I was trying to work out, because I find it quite hard to stick to one thing. I can't seem to just have. I can stick to a job, but I find it hard to stay engaged in one thing. So I tend
Me
to work
too.
better when I've
I've
got
been
lots
I've
of
been
different.
reevaluating that too. Yeah.
Yeah. So I tend to work better when I've got quite a few creative projects on the go, and
Yep.
I just thought, right, I think it's time to like really get some answers on how I function as a human. And I went into therapy. I explained quite a lot of things, but then mainly thought I'm going to bring up misophonia because I've spent years now looking it up. My therapist just had never heard of it. Like, I was
hmm
surprised, but she just had no idea what I was talking about. And instead, she has referred me to be assessed for ADHD and autism, which I'm
Uh-huh.
still on the list for that because it takes a long time to get that on the NHS in the UK now
Right. I've
because
heard.
it's
Yeah.
very overstretched. So it's been 3 years and I'm still waiting. But it was funny that was when I told her it was to do with noises. She immediately said, "Oh, this sounds like autism." So
Yeah, it sounds like it, but
mhm.
yeah, and obviously there's a lot of overlap, but yeah, it's not necessarily autism as far as I know.
Yeah, well, even though I felt she was a good therapist, I still felt very alone in
Hmm.
the misophonia. It just still felt like, it's yeah. I mean, this is why you're doing this podcast,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
it's just trying to bring awareness to it, because what I find is like people who don't have it seem to think that trying to you're trying to make their life bad. So
right.
there's almost like this, oh, this is how I perceive it. So sometimes my mum and my stepdad, my stepdad's even worse. He's like, makes me feel so awful about it. He'll do
Oh,
things on purpose, so he'll chew
oh
louder.
no. Okay.
And for example, when I've told him I was pregnant, he went, "Oh, how are you going to cope with the noise? Because the baby's going to eat and it's going to suck, milk." And I didn't even respond, because I thought,
Yeah,
I'm not even going to
don't
dignify
dignify
that.
them.
Like,
Yeah.
it's just ridiculous, because that's not how it works. But it's
Well, that's even if it did, that's not what you say.
no, no, no. Um, so yeah, I find that even now I'm 33, and I've tried to tell my mom a few times, but her and my stepdad just think they just think it's an absolute joke. They just think it's me being
Yeah.
obnoxious and awkward. That's just,
Right.
and it doesn't matter. So I've kind of come to peace with that now. I just think, yeah, I can't convince the entire world to understand me. All I can really do is pinpoint the people that do make me feel okay,
Yeah. Yeah.
and just give them more energy, and make sure that I'm spending more time with those people,
Yeah.
because it's just so hard to cope if not. So my sister, like I was saying before, she's incredible. She really is just incredible with it all, and she has to remind her husband sometimes. She'll be like, "Oh, you're chewing gum. Just if you don't mind taking it out, because it's easier for Rosie, and we want to all have a nice day." And she kind of makes it a really light-hearted thing, which
Yeah,
I find really helpful because it should. That's what I've always struggled with is the community. How do you communicate
communicate
this
it.
to
Yeah,
people
yeah,
without sounding like a dick?
yeah.
Like, how do you say, I really don't want you to make quite a normal noise because it'll ruin my entire life and I'll be in a bad mood and it'll ruin this experience. Like, how do you
Right.
say that? So I've tried to be really direct with people. Um, yeah, I'm still learning basically. It's
Yeah, and honestly, so am I. But
yeah,
it's I think part of it is yeah, trying to address the defensiveness that other people feel
yeah,
when you know when you're telling them this because they suddenly feel like you're attacking them for you know the usual counter argument is, oh, I'm just doing a normal human thing. Yeah, we know you're
yeah.
doing. We know it's almost as if we don't know that. Like we do know
I
that.
know,
We
I
do know how
know.
stupid this sounds. We do know all that. That's kind of why we're
Eh, yeah, and it's
we're
embarrassing to
mentioning it.
ask.
Yes, right.
Yeah.
Yes, embarrassment is on top of the guilt and the shame. Yes,
hmm
absolutely.
and I always try and say, well, do you think I want to ask you this? It's
Mm-hmm.
humiliating. Like it's clearly for a reason. It's clearly, but it's hard to.
Yeah.
I think I heard on another one of your podcasts someone saying it's a real reflection of someone's character how they react
Yeah.
to you. So I've got a friend, a Chilean friend, she's now gone back to Chile. She was here for a few months and she's fabulous. And we were in the car together one day. I was helping her do quite a lot of bits and bobs and running her around. And she got into the car one day and she was chewing. And it's the first time I realised, it's the first time I noticed her chewing. She was chewing gum, which is my number one hate.
Mm-hmm.
And I just thought, oh my God, I I can't drive. I can't drive and just chat
Yeah.
to her. And I just had this real moment where I just thought, right, I think I can trust her with this. You just have to go for it. And I
Mm-hmm.
just said, oh, look, just before we get going, would you mind just taking chewing gum out? I know it sounds weird. I just really hate the noise of it. And she was like, oh, okay, no problem. She just took it out.
Yeah.
And that was it.
That's
No questions asked. But she is like, it wasn't even, there was no defense, but
right.
that is her character. You know, she's quite comfortable with honesty, I guess. It's so because I think it's been discussed in other ones, but they're all cultural crossovers where I find that I've actually found that asking like European, so like more like because the UK is no longer European, so more like Spanish and French. I find it easier to ask people
Mm.
from those countries because there's less awkwardness in those countries. People are generally quite upfront, but
Right.
British people are, very well known to be awkward. We don't know how to ask for what we want. It's
I've heard about the stiff upper lip or just kind of like
Yeah, it's true, and it's true. It's completely true. It's like
yeah.
it's everywhere. I mean, not every single person, but generally, our
Right.
culture is to feel incredibly uncomfortable asking for what we want, and also feeling incredibly comfortable when someone tells us what they want. So, trying to manage having
Gotcha.
misophonia in the British culture is like just so awkward.
Yeah.
So I've actually found it easier to be around people from other cultures in misophonia, like when having misophonia.
It's interesting. I mean, maybe that's well. I mean, there's just so many people with misophonia and misophonia research happening in the UK. Maybe that's a
hmm
reflection of that. And here in the
hmm
United States, there's such a pick yourself up by the bootstraps culture
Yeah,
that even though we claim to be more aware of mental health, I think there's a subtext that no, you're actually supposed to just pull yourself up by the bootstraps and not
yeah,
make a big
yeah.
deal
Just
about
get on
stuff.
with
Yeah,
it. Yeah,
yeah,
suck it up. We say over here. I don't know if
yeah. Oh
that's
yeah, no, we
suck it up.
yep, no,
And
exactly.
it's like it's not as easy as that.
What were your so when if you're not other than backing out of situations and what were kind of your coping methods? Was it just living in headphones or when you're not in your room or
um. So when I wasn't in, so if we're talking about my teenage years,
yeah,
and
let's start with that. Yeah.
yeah, so I would avoid. It would just be avoidance. So it would just like I just simply would not do anything that exposed me to certain towns. So I just wouldn't eat with the family. I wouldn't. And if I really had to, I mean, I think I just would sit further away,
Yeah.
and I would have to face a certain way so that certain movements weren't in my eye line.
Right.
Um, and I would just sit like maybe closer to my sister because it was just my mum that I found so difficult with. And then as I got a bit older and started to use like our metro, like our kind of subway type thing
Yeah.
in the northeast, I would get on there and I I would have to have headphones with me. I'd panic if I didn't have headphones.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I also love music, so it would be I would just kind of zone into music and try and forget about it. But I've noticed that I'm finding transport in general harder as I get older, to the point where I don't know if I could ever get it. I'm still trying to maneuver this. Like I find it really hard to get on public transport,
Mm.
aeroplanes. I just because you really can't escape. At least when you're somewhere, just stationary, you can just walk out of the room and take 5 minutes. But um, yeah, but my and as a now an adult, I'm very lucky to have a very understanding partner. Which has really transformed the way that I view it because I feel validated now. I
Mm-hmm.
think I've had plenty of supportive partners, but I know that they haven't quite understood it, and it's kind of been like okay, because after a while getting used to this person, I would then start to feel really irritated by how they
Yep.
eat, and
Yep.
not really wanting to sit with them on a night time. So right now, the house that I live in with my partner, we've got two living rooms. We've moved into a house with two living rooms. Like we've made it so that it's got two living rooms for this reason. So I'm now sitting
Mm.
in my living room and he's sitting in his. But
Yeah.
he is someone who needs to recharge alone a lot. So it works really well for us as a couple.
Yeah.
So he doesn't have misophonia, but he does really understand being really irritated by certain things. So
Mm-hmm.
right from the beginning, he understood it, and we just kind of clicked. And I'll come in some days, and I'm just like, I'm in a terrible mood. There was someone shooting on the bus. I need to just go upstairs, and he'll be like,
Yeah.
"Don't even worry about it." Like, just so I think for me, my cope mechanism now is being given the spaces where I feel safe,
Right. Yeah.
having the room to someone actually giving me that space, go and take 5 minutes, so that I don't, completely fly off the handle. And sometimes we get the bus. I do drive, but occasionally we just get the bus into the city, and that can be really difficult. And my partner will just say, go on, just put these on, and let's think about this, and he'll kind of distract me.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
so I'm lucky that I've got that support from him, but I'm still on the journey of I need to be able to manage this alone, because there are times when I'm alone and with my baby, and
Yeah.
I'm totally triggered, and then I'm like, to the point where I can't look in the same direction as when my baby is, because there's a person triggering me behind it, and I'm like,
Mm.
I'm having to ignore her, because if not, I'll just. So it's just constantly a process, a learning process.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. No,
Um,
that's interesting.
yeah,
And how did you mention it to your partner when you first met, or I'm curious, kind of how that conversation went.
yeah, I think I did. Um, I'm trying to think where it was all a bit of a blur, but I think I remember it being really early on, because I think we when we went out on a date, he was talking about how much he just gets generally irritated by people, just
Mm.
like, being around too many people and for too long, and just how the effect it can have. And then I think because he said that, and he wasn't just one of these people that's like, oh, I love being. It just wasn't super positive, right? It
Yeah.
made me feel comfortable that I could say. And I think I remember just being like, oh, well, if we're on that topic, like I really hate people making certain noises. And I just don't remember him ever being phased by it. He was like, all right,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. Whereas other people I've told are like, okay. And then they'll be like, so can we not go to a restaurant, or can we not do this? And I'm like, no,
Right.
it's complicated, and it's full of nuances. It's there's not like one size fits all with it. It's like some days it's if I'm tired, it's much worse,
Yep.
and it's
Stressed and all that. Yeah.
stressed, and yeah, again, just who you're around and feeling the energy in the room. And if you feel like you're around people who don't support you, it just makes it 1,000 times worse. But yeah, no, I think I felt very comfortable mentioning it to him straight away. But that was the first time in my life. So that was when I was 30, 31.
Hmm.
Yeah.
When did you find out it had a name?
I think it was around, um, seem to remember it being in my early 20s. I
Okay.
think
That makes sense. About 10 to 15 years ago.
10 or 15 years ago. Yeah. I think I either saw an article or I think I just Googled. I think I was trying so hard to understand it,
Yeah.
and then I came, and then yeah, I think I came across the term, and then I remember messaging my dad and saying, "I found out there's a name for that thing that we have," and he was very dismissive about it,
Wow.
really dismissive. He was like, but then it has become, it's obviously circulating quite a lot now in
Yeah.
really reputable newspapers in this country, and I think there's been quite a few articles about it in the newspaper that he reads. So I have noticed that recently he's been a little bit more on board with it. But I try to tell my grandma, who's like late 80s, and she's definitely from the you know, stiff upper
Yeah.
lip culture. But she told me stories when I was little that I recognise now. Which just she was struggling so much. She said that her granddad used to smoke a pipe, and the way he used to tap the pipe and clean it out and smoke it. She said she used
Yeah.
to go off to another room and cry, and she couldn't understand why. And
Wow.
I said, "Oh,
Yeah.
that's misophonia," and she was like, "No, it's not. That's just," she calls it disease of the affluent. She thinks all these new things are like diseases for like affluent,
First world problems.
because
That's the old
yeah,
way of
and
saying
I'm like,
first world problems.
no, it's not.
Wow. That's
Yeah,
fascinating.
yeah.
Yeah. What did your friends say when you were growing up? Did you mention it to anybody?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I have to say I've got like a couple of friends, two or three friends from school that I'm still quite close to, um, who know all about it. My best friend is neurodivergent, so she, I think, just really understands just stuff like this in general, because she gets quite triggered by certain things. But again, I wouldn't say she's got misophonia, but she does get quite triggered by certain noises and just, I don't know, general things. So she's always been understanding of it, and she kind of humoured it, but in the right way. So I've always felt comfortable with her. I've noticed that a lot of the friends I've made since moving, since being an adult, so people I've met through work and all that kind of stuff, I haven't really mentioned it to, because I'm so scared that by mentioning it they'll become awkward. Oh, we can't do this for Rosie, we can't do this. And I think because I'm from a village, and then I moved to this city. I mean, it's not a huge city or anything, but I kind of started a new life here, and I kind of didn't want to bring this like thing with me, so I've kind of downplayed it since I've been in Newcastle. And then it's just ended up coming through with some close friends, and they're like, "Oh yeah, sorry, I forgot you don't like the noise of this, or you don't like the noise of that." And then I basically I just don't go into it too much, because I just feel like the more I say about it, the more uncomfortable they will feel, and I can't
Mm,
bear that. So yeah, basically I only tell certain people.
yeah.
I don't feel comfortable telling everyone.
Yep. We'll have to kind of usually have to make that calculation as
Yeah,
to
and
who
I
it's
just kind
with.
of I do make plans for people depending on how I think they'll be. So like I've got a friend who does tend to chew sometimes, but I have asked her before, and she always goes, "Oh, sorry," but then the next time I see her, she's chewing
Right.
again. So I
Right.
avoid going on like public transport or anywhere where I'll be stuck with her.
Right.
Um, yeah, it's such hard work.
Yeah. And it sounds like a lot of stuff has been going on. Obviously, in your in your adulthood, you got partner, child. You're kind
Hmm.
of trying to negotiate stuff, and you said you were trying to see a therapist about other stuff. Like, I'm
Hmm.
always curious. Like, do does your mom and stepfather know about other stuff going on in your life, and there is just is that more acceptable, and then misophonia is just not? Or I'm curious, kind of
No,
like
actually, come to think of it, they don't
care
tend
about
to
it.
acknowledge any of my, because I've had
Yeah,
I've had quite a lot of mental health struggles over the years, and
yeah,
mainly to do with I had this pattern until I kind of went to therapy and sorted it out. But I had this pattern of getting involved in a situation, whether it be like a workplace or a boy,
Mm-hmm.
and everything would be okay, and then it would just go so terribly wrong that I would have a huge meltdown, and then would be out of action for like a few months, and it would be a very dramatic thing. And
Mm.
I've had to access crisis teams in mental health before through it, and I had problems with drugs when I was
Oh,
about 19, like 18, 19, 20, which I do think part of that was to do with just wanting to be taken away
self-medicating.
from, because you're just on such a different wavelength. For a while I kind of hid behind drugs, and then it kind of worked in bar scenes. I hid behind drinking quite a lot, and I do feel there's been a bit of a link between my addictive behaviour and my sort of inability to stabilize or monitor my moods. And I've had a lot of situations where I've typically had a huge meltdown, and had to kind of reevaluate my entire life and think about what I'm doing. And that went on all through my teenage years, and then all through my 20s, and then it's only not been a thing since a couple of years ago, since having this therapy, which did really help me. And I told my family what was going on with me. I said, I've had this therapy, and we've done a timeline of my life, and it turns out, I have been struggling, and which I'm going to try and work it out. Why can't I manage my emotions at certain times, and why can't I seem to stay on a certain level? And apart from my sister, it's just not acknowledged. It's just I took my mum out for a drink for a birthday, I think maybe a couple of years ago. And after we'd had a few glasses of wine, I said to her, "Look, I've really been making a lot of effort to work out what's been going on with me,
Yeah.
and I think it might be, a mixture of my misophonia. I think I might have ADHD, which I do actually think I have ADHD. I've got a lot of the sort of characteristics of
Yeah.
a person with ADHD,
There's a lot of
and I'm
overlap.
totally okay with that. But it's been like lovely to learn about it. And I really tried to open myself up to my mum and tell her, and she looked blank, and then just said, "I think you were just really naughty," and that was
Oh,
it.
oh no.
And
Yeah.
she just kind of said, she said, "You were a really horrible teenager." And it took me all my strength, because I've had this therapy now, and I can.
Wow.
It's just to say okay, and just not. But the old me would have absolutely, I would have created a scene,
Flipped
stormed
out.
off. But I just
Yeah.
thought, okay, well, at least I've tried. I've told them. I've been so open with them. I've said, I think there's a few things going on here, but ultimately, my parents, and I think a lot of people from the generation, kind of boomer generation, they see it as a reflection on their parent, and so they just don't want to acknowledge it. So I think my mum just doesn't. Even when I said I've been to therapy about anything, I can see it in her eyes. She's like, "Oh, are you talking about me in therapy?" It's just not a
Right.
comfortable thing to discuss. Whereas my sister, anything I've told her, she's just like, "Okay, great," and she gets on board with it, and she'll research it. And so, I even telling her I was coming on this podcast. She went off, she subscribed, she's read up about it, she's read up about you. Like,
Okay.
that's her love, that's her caring for me, because she wants to understand like what I'm seeing and what I'm going through. So I even said, "Look, it says on the website, they're gonna take out any noises that might be triggering. I feel
Right.
seen." And
Right.
she just thinks that's amazing, but she's the only person in
Yeah.
my family. But I'm lucky to have that.
Did you do you think that your mom, maybe even going back to an early age, your mom is somehow, I don't know, doesn't want to feel guilty or something, or admit that maybe she had something to, or think that she might have something to do with it? I'm just curious if she's got.
I think something I've really noticed about me and my mum, the difference in us is, I would say that I'm a very empathetic person. I've got a lot of empathy, and I've noticed that my mum doesn't. And whether that's her own thing, maybe my sister has speculated that she might be neurodivergent.
Yeah.
She would never look into it, even if she was. But we have noticed that she really, really can't put herself in other people's shoes. So I think and I don't think she's not a bad person. She's a lovely person, but I've noticed that kind of anything that I discuss generally about other people and how they've struggled, she just it's very much dismissed. Just kind of like, well, my life's been harder. I don't know. She's a bit of a victim. She's kind of got victim mentality, and I think I don't know. But she didn't have a good. It's a whole other story. But she didn't. She didn't have the best upbringing or the
Yeah.
best childhood, and she wasn't made to feel safe in her childhood. So I think that's been passed down to me. So I used to feel really angry at my mum for a lot of this, but I don't now because I know that she's struggling as well. But
That's
as
interesting because yeah, there's a lot of there's the idea of epigenetics and how some
mhm,
things do get passed down, not genetically in the DNA, but the
mhm.
experiences of previous generations can come through. And if your mom, was dealing with those experiences through her own like dysregulation, maybe these are things that you were probably witnessing at a very young age, even pre-verbal age.
Yeah, yeah, and actually, growing up, my mum couldn't. Yeah, she wasn't good at managing her emotions.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that probably has, um, like, what's the word? It's kind of fanned the flames of my
Mm-hmm.
misophonia because my mum used to quite regularly break down very easily. So like,
Mm,
if something went wrong, she would cry or take a huff, or
yeah.
I sort of remember going shopping. We went to a massive shopping centre with a big car park. We couldn't find a space, and then someone took the one space she was going
Oh
to get,
no.
and she was so upset that she like wound on the window and stuck her tongue out at this man, and then drove us home. And she was like, "I'm not having someone do that to me." So I was kind of brought up around.
Okay. Yeah.
I've always felt like I've had to kind of parent my parents really, but I just don't think I love her, but I don't think she has the emotional capacity to understand like what is going on.
That's interesting because that's something. I mean, it's maybe I don't know, somewhat related, but it's just this is one of the lessons I've had of misophonia and learning how it's so kind of in the same ballpark as dysregulation on many things is
Right.
having my own kids. Especially now with a newish one who's still kind of like post toddler. I'm trying extra hard now, knowing what I know about
Mm.
misophonia, to just not do those kind of even that garage kind of situation where
Yeah.
I know there's some situations where I've probably done a variation of that, in the
Yeah.
past or would have done in the past, and that's not something I want to kind of has have anyone witness who might be impressionable. So
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. I mean, yeah, having children, I mean, it just, yeah, my perspective on
yeah,
life has just totally changed, and how it's just shone a light on how I actually react to things, and
yeah,
how I want to be, and who I want to present myself to my child. And um I have noticed that, yeah, I'm still really struggling to regulate my emotions a lot of the time.
hmm,
I'm definitely better at it. I have to do a lot of self-care, as you
yeah,
can probably relate. Like,
yeah,
if I've had a week where I haven't eaten very well, I've drank a bit too much, it's worse. But uh there's been a few times with my daughter, I've felt really, she's only made a couple of whingy noises, and I've just thought, oh my god, I feel like I'm gonna have a meltdown. And my partner's had to, again, luckily he recognizes when I'm about to sort of
hmm,
fold, and he'll just say, don't worry, I've got this, go to another room, just go upstairs,
yeah,
take five. So that's like what I have to do. So I'm still trying to learn but how to regulate my emotions around my daughter. But it is all I've ever known, because yeah, my mother was like that, but my dad was like that, but even worse, I would say. He's mellowed with age now, but when I was little, he was
hmm,
the most reactive person. If something happened, if he dropped something, it was like, oh my god, oh, everything was so dramatic.
wow,
Everything was, you come in from
yeah,
work, and most people would read a room before they get in, and
yep,
oh, what's the vibe in this room? He would just walk into it and just emotionally dump
oh
straight away.
god,
I've had the worst day, la la la. So I think
yeah.
me and my sister are so close because we've kind of had to navigate having like children as parents in a way. Um, it's been hard. But yeah, it's interesting. I had never thought of that being linked to misophonia, the dysregulation of emotions of my parents.
Hey, I didn't know that until really like a couple of years ago, and that's like halfway
Mm-hmm.
through doing this podcast, and
Really?
so it's not really talked about that much, but it's something I'm trying to. I don't know. I don't mean to pry into people's backgrounds, but it's just such a common pattern that I think it needs to
Right.
be. investigate it more. And I will say one, I did not want to forget just letting you know that it's usually your own kids do not trigger you. Like maybe it
Hmm.
there's obviously exceptions, but like please don't unless unless it does happen, but please don't worry about don't worry too much about like your own child.
No, when I've already
Um,
noticed,
yeah,
I'm like, oh, I feel like if anything, I find her eating really, really cute. Like
right.
the louder she is, the more I'm like, oh, it's weird. It doesn't seem to trigger me
I
at
think it's the
all.
whole threat thing. If your
Yeah,
brain is thinking that these sounds or visuals are usually threats, somehow your brain,
yeah.
luckily, is smart enough to know that your child is not going to come and
They're
attack
not
you.
gonna. I
Yeah,
think like, my biggest worries about being a parent going forward with misophonia is we've never been on holiday before as a family,
right.
and I just again it just gets harder for me traveling as I get older, and it's such a shame because I love it.
Hmm.
But the last time I went away was last year when I was pregnant, and me and my partner flew to Lisbon, and the plane. I mean, I just had to sit. I had to literally like almost be in the fetal position with my hands over my ears, like
Yeah,
an eye mask on. It was just horrible. And luckily, the flight to Portugal's, I think it's about 2 3 hours or something, but it was awful. And then when we had to get on a big coach trip from Faro to Lisbon, and which took about 5 hours, and a woman sat behind me and ate rice cakes the whole way. And oh my god, it was horrible. And I tried to move seat, and the bus driver was like, "You can't move seat. You're not allowed." And I was like, "You don't understand. I have to move seat."
yeah,
And I was pregnant as well, so my hormones were just like
right.
everywhere. And then now that I've had the baby, I'm like, I can't go on like that if I have a child, like
Yeah,
because that's not. I can't act like an irrational person because I'm so worried that I'll traumatize her and she'll
right.
get resentment that I have for my because I resent my dad's misophonia when I was little because I do think the way he handled a lot of it was terrible because it was all about how it was other people's fault, not his.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I resent that, and that's kind of been his way of thinking about lots of things in general. And a lot of my mental health issues have been kind of disregarded by him. Not that he doesn't think I have them, but they've kind of been disregarded because I think he doesn't want to feel that he has in any way played a part
Right.
in what's going on with me. But anyway, I'm sort of going off in a
No,
tangent. But
these are important answers. I was going to
yeah,
ask also if I don't know how much you ended up talking to that therapist about misophonia, but
mm-hmm,
if the conversation ever went to this, like trying to investigate the past to
mm-hmm,
see if it had anything to do with misophonia.
mm-hmm.
Well, I guess did your well, I guess maybe it sounds like you didn't really talk to the therapist much about it beyond referrals, but did it ever come up like
Uh, what, the misophonia again?
yeah, kind of your past and kind of all the dysregulation
Yeah,
and
so
stuff and
it she was great in the way that she was a great therapist. She really changed my life. She just hadn't heard of misophonia, but it didn't mean she
mm,
didn't understand. But what she thought was really important to do for me was to do this like really thorough timeline of my life, and that had
yeah.
never happened before. And it wasn't until we did this timeline where it just unraveled so many things. I mean, I've had therapy before, and but nothing like worked or hit like this particular therapist did because I think it was just so thorough. And what she did was actually realize lots of ways in which my parents had played a role. Whereas my whole life, I've always just thought it's me, I'm naughty, as well as noise police, I was also given like danger. I was called problem child after the
Mm,
film in the 90s. And I
right.
was known, and it was like, yeah, I was always known as that person. So I think for years I carried around this thing that everything's my fault. And she actually started to realize that a lot of things that were happening, there was a lot of
Mm,
family turmoil at the time that I
yep.
went into therapy. She started to get me to try and look at my parents' behavior, and I hadn't done it to that extent before. And she kind of recognized that there was quite a bit of scapegoating going on, and because I'm the emotionally volatile one in the family, it's quite easy to pin lots of things on me. And
Mm,
she recognized a lot of this stuff. So it was more like it wasn't just about misophonia, but it that triggered a bigger conversation about me not feeling safe as a child, me
yep.
not feeling heard. And when I've tried to broach these subjects with my mum and my dad separately, I mean, they will not. in their eyes, it's like it's all on me. It's all my
Yeah.
fault,
Yeah.
and I've had to accept it. It's heartbreaking, but it's
Yeah.
again, it's more of a reflection of them. I'm trying to be a better person. I'm trying to learn more about myself. Um, but no, that was as far as the therapist kind of. It's all she could do. I remember saying
Mm-hmm.
that, I'm going to write this down. I'm going to research what misophonia is because this will help me going forward. And then our
Mm-hmm.
therapy had ended by the time, it would be interesting when I do have my ADHD and autism. The way
Yeah.
they assess you, like it'll be interesting to see how misophonia links in any of it, but
Right.
or how they think. I don't know. It's yeah.
No,
I don't know. That's
you
a
said a
whole.
lot. You said a lot there. I think. I mean, I get where you're. Yeah, I get
Yeah.
what you're saying. I'm glad that. I mean, I think that's a. At least for me, it's been a. It's been a eye opening for me to be able to connect it to the past and see how
Mm-hmm.
misophonia might be related to it, but also how past has kind of led to other behaviors and
Mm-hmm.
emotional outbursts that I would not have probably even thought about until unless I was doing all this research into misophonia. So I try to take
Yeah.
that as a positive the lesson. I mean, that's what I
Yeah.
think the misophonia is. It's yes, it's right. It's we don't want it, but I feel like it's your body telling you something, whether it's like correct all the time or not. But it's I think it's trying to tell you in good faith something. So.
I know what you mean. It's like I feel like I'm only now after like years of trying to read about it and learn about it and connect with other people
Hmm.
that there's an element of there being a superpower in it. It's weird.
Yeah, right.
Like this kind of like because I feel like there's kind of a heightened sense of
Empathy.
spirituality and
That,
sort of
yeah. Hmm.
empathy in and I'm really trying to be kind to myself in that way. And
Yep.
after so many years of seeing it as this horrible, I'm this horrible person, noise police,
Yep. Yep.
it's and trying to kind of flip it in a way.
Obviously, we're not trying to say that it's like superpowers and like we need to
No,
keep
no,
it and
it's
but
not
it's
actually a superpower,
yeah,
but
exactly. But it's yeah, it's not just it's not easy. It's not as easy as just calling it a defect. There is
no, it's very complicated.
yes, it's very complicated.
It's
Exactly.
very complicated, and it's like hard to know.
Hmm.
And we're in the early stages of like the research with it, and it's like where does it fit? Like
Hmm.
I don't. Yeah, it's just it's it's very complicated, and I'm I'm kind of curious as to how it's going to evolve.
Right.
Individually, as I get older, I'm always curious about that because I do find that it's
Worse.
getting harder for me, but easier to understand.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah. No,
it's
I feel
harder.
you there.
My triggers on how they get harder every year. I'm finding them harder to tolerate, but then I'm finding them easier to um,
Right.
dissect, and instead of it just being teenage hormonal like blah, like I'm just gonna smash this because I don't
Hmm.
understand how I feel. It's now
Hmm.
like I find myself not reclusing, but I find myself just wanting a quieter existence generally.
Yeah.
Um,
And not to get too philosophical, but I just like to think out loud, and I'm almost like because I'm into the self care and also the
mhm.
maybe the inner child soothing kind of therapies that are out there, and
Yeah.
if and just obviously I've had time to think about the why does it get worse as you get older if but if it's somehow as you get older you're kind of getting more distance chronologically from that inner child, if that's part of it where you're not really I don't know, maybe that inner child feels more, I don't know, distant and alone. That
Mhm.
dichotomy is causing some, I don't know, is your body's telling you to pay attention to itself more and kind of like try to come full circle and somehow
Yeah. What you mean
repair and heal yourself.
the inner child is feeling more distant? You mean as you get older, or
Yeah, somehow
mhm.
I know I'm getting a little too spiritual
No,
and
no, it's
philosophical here, but it's like there was some kind of break that happened over a few years or something, and
mhm.
as you're kind of like that I don't know, that inner child wants to be heard. And if
Mhm.
it's like as you're getting older, maybe it's feeling like it's that opportunity is getting lost. and it's just screaming louder or
Yeah,
something.
okay. Yeah, I get you. Yeah. I mean, I love going into the philosophical side of things, and I actually trained to be a
Sometimes it makes me
psychotherapist.
cringe, but I just like to just say stuff
No,
out loud just to kind of like, because no one else is really looking into this stuff, or not enough people. So
no, I know, totally. I mean, I literally say to myself, so I say to I talk to my inner child. I'll
yes,
sometimes go,
so
I'll
do
be
I.
like, well done, Rosie. Like, because it'll be
Mm,
something just little that's really, really helped me in my day. And I'll be like, well
right.
done. And I'll be really, but I was training to be a psychotherapist in 2018. I've put it all on a halt
Hmm.
while I figured out other things because I actually found it quite intense. But that's when I think that was probably what was pushing me as well to discover, well, learn
Yeah.
more about misophonia. But that's when I became really aware of my inner child
Hmm.
and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, I do feel like as I get older, I feel more protective of my inner child. I
Yeah.
just feel so, yeah, yeah,
No,
it's
it's
just,
it's I didn't even know the term existed until a couple of years ago. That's how lame I am. But I just now I'm just obsessed with it. I think it's super important
mhm,
to 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 think about and soothe and yeah, it's
yeah,
and I think I just think it has a lot to do with misophonia. And the one thing I was going to say is, yeah, you mentioned research. There is research. However, I'm kind of involved in kind of monitoring some of it, and
mhm,
what kind of worries me is the modern trend in psychology is more about treating the symptom, purely the
mhm,
symptom, and not
mhm,
really kind of digging deep. And
yeah.
I'm afraid that it might take longer to get to really study the stuff that we're talking about, because there's such a focus in the world on the very top level surface level symptoms. So
Yeah, yeah, and sort of
yep.
quick fix, and yeah, I mean, I don't know, I think it's quite similar in America, but in the UK, I mean, we're just all on antidepressants now,
Yeah, yeah.
and I mean, I've been on and off antidepressants for years, and I actively said no to them so many times
Mm,
when I was referred, to a doctor, and that would before even thinking that I might need to go to therapy, it was like just take this. And then
mm,
I've kind of found a bit of a balance now where I take a low dosage, or I did take
mm-hmm,
a low dosage to sort of manage in feelings that were too intense.
mm-hmm.
And then it kind of allowed me to explore um, other things. So I think there's a balance to be had. But
Yeah,
yeah, I think it's fundamentally it is about getting to the root and really understanding like what your journey has been, and how you've learned how to be in this world, and how you've kind of had to navigate that as you get older. And
yep.
yeah,
Yeah, a lot
there's a
there.
lot to go in there. Yeah,
Is a lot there, but yeah, I mean, yeah, Rosie, I mean, yeah, we're coming up about an hour here. This is
yeah,
super. Oh, hopefully we covered all the stuff in your notes, and I don't know.
yeah, I think I did, and if we didn't, it's because I just spiral all the time. So
No, those are the conversations I love.
yeah,
If it's not going to be
constantly.
you, it would be me, which I probably did at
Yeah,
various points.
like I'll start thinking about something else halfway through a point, and then realize that I'm like, which point am I trying to make?
Hmm.
That was something I was a bit worried about before coming on, and then I just thought, oh well, okay.
No, I encourage that now, because
Yeah.
doing these conversations, there's all these different layers and dimensions which I didn't even know existed when I started
Mhm.
doing this podcast, and I find those fascinating, because, like I said, not enough people are studying them, so we got to talk about them.
Yeah. Well, it's weird the link and how I got to find this podcast was just that I, something had come up on Instagram, and then
Mm,
um about misophonia, and I thought, oh, I'm going to read the comments here because it'll be interesting to see who
yeah.
actually. And of course, 90%, 95% of the comments were like, "This is ridiculous. This isn't a thing." And then
Uh,
one girl, I forgot her name. I should really credit her, but she said, "No, this is a real thing. I'm studying it, and I'm studying at Newcastle University. She's doing it as part of her PhD." And then I messaged her directly and said, "Oh my god, I'm in the same city as you. I didn't know there was other people." And then she then directed me to you, and I was just like, oh, what a lovely little link that was.
Yeah, I think you're talking about Paris because Paris was on
Yes,
recently, and she's
got it.
It's just funny because when you said you're in Newcastle, I was like, oh, I gotta text Paris now to mention that somebody else is from Newcastle. But
Yeah,
sounds like you've already connected.
yeah, she was like the main point of connection, and
That's
then
awesome.
yeah, she was like, "You've got to go on this podcast." And I
That's
also said
awesome.
about that if she needed any sort of guinea pig or anything
Yeah.
that you, but yeah,
Well, cool, Rosie. Yeah, this has been great.
yeah,
I don't know if you have anything else you want to share, but yeah, it's been great to have you on and hear your story. It's going to help a lot of people.
yes, thank you. No, it's been helpful to talk about it. It's always it's always lovely to share it, although it can be hard at times. It can be
Yeah,
sad, but it's like just to know that there's other people, because for so many years I really thought it was only me and
right.
maybe like my dad. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's like lovely to feel seen and heard. So thank you.
Thank you again, Rosie. Wonderful, wonderful talking to you. If you liked this episode, don't forget to leave a quick review or just hit the 5 stars wherever you listen to this podcast. You can hit me up by email at hello@misophoniapodcast.com or go to the website, misophoniapodcast.com. It's even easier to send a message on Instagram at Misophonia Podcast, follow there, or Facebook at Misophonia Podcast, and on Twitter or X, it's Misophonia Show. Support the show by visiting the Patreon at patreon.com/Misophonia Podcast. Theme music, as always, is by Moby. And until next week, wishing you peace and quiet.